My special guest today is Carl from Montreal, who's in a kind of legal limbo for somewhere between the Secret Service and Dr. Phillips and appeals to old legal problems down in Florida. I just mentioned, Carl, I just discovered that Eliot Spitzer on February 14th published an article in the Washington Post explaining how the Bush administration stopped the states from stepping in to help consumers in dealing with improper mortgage lending practices. And it seems to me this is just the kind This is just a kind of a criticism, a public criticism of the Bush administration for which they're famous for retaliation. I already mentioned the case of Joe Wilson. It seems to me this business with Eliot Spitzer could be as a punishment for having published this article in the Washington Post. I'm kind of stunned.
Yeah, it sounds very possible. That's some sort of retaliation. That's why they brought up this thing with a prostitute in order to discredit him. That could be very well true, because it does seem to fit a pattern that's consistent pattern.
These are very nasty people.
And I hadn't finished. This doctor, what happened was in August 2000, he did this report when he interviewed me at the jail, but there were some things in there in his report which was untrue regarding my family history, where my maternal grandfather, read it here, with schizophrenia. He alleges in his report, I don't know where he gets his information from, he says that my family history is positive for a maternal grandfather with schizophrenia and a maternal aunt with bipolar disorder. His father, mother, grandmother, and aunt are all alcohol and or drug abusers. Then he goes on, where I have reportedly, they uses that word again, reportedly, which turns up frequently in my documents, set a scooter on fire when I was a kid. It also says I attempted to set fire to a house but was unsuccessful. It doesn't cite any police report. He also has a history of putting insects in the microwave. I live with my grandmother. My grandmother never had a microwave because, she's one of those health nuts and she don't like radiation and stuff and other things alleged in his report.
This is very scary. Your assertion is this is all fabricated claims, right, for which there's no evidence whatsoever.
But later what happened, one of the prosecutors that became involved was Paul McNulty, who was later, involved in the Moussaoui case and also in the Robert Hansen, because I was in the Alexandria Detention Center where the same people were detained in parts of 2001, 2000, and 2002. And Paul McNulty was later appointed by Bush to be Deputy Attorney General under Alberto Gonzales. And he was one of the ones involved in my case. And what happened was I was put in this mental hospital until July of 2001 when the hospital said I was perfectly competent and I could go back to trial. And then 9/11 happened. And what happened then is when my lawyer turned on me, then they offered me this plea agreement. And in the plea agreement, I didn't want a plea agreement at first, so my lawyer went back to the prosecutor, and my prosecutor said, well, we'll make sure those Florida charges are dropped if you sign the plea agreement, even though that they were ordered dismissed previously. And then my lawyer said, well, you get 20 years, if you lose and go to trial, and sign this plea agreement, you'll probably get time served and go home. And then I signed a plea agreement. Then what they did is they brought up allegations which supposedly came from Florida from this woman, and they put them into a pre-sentence report. And the only thing I was accused of was harassing this woman on the phone. But what they did is they made up this story that I supposedly poisoned this woman's food, tried to stab her with a hypodermic needle, drove a U-Haul truck into her house, and put a gun to her head. And then it says the last time the victim saw the defendant was in January 98. She fired a gun at the defendant as he attempted to cut a screen door at her residence to attack her. And then they gave this timeline. She changed her phone number several times to get away. And then that went on and made 35 phone calls. But instead of saying between December 23rd, 98 and December 28th, 98, these 35 phone calls, they stretched it out between December 23rd, 98 and December 28th, 1999. They distorted that because I tracked down the original police report and the prosecutor documents from Florida, which show that those phone calls were made when I was living in Florida. For the federal court to get jurisdiction over the case, they alleged I was in Virginia when those phone calls were made, and they were across state lines. So what they got me on was interstate commerce or harassing phone calls, and then they gave me 5 years in jail.
Jesus Christ.
And then 1 year for the cartoons to Bush, instead of giving me time served. And then I have the plea agreement transcript here, where the prosecutor said, I would like to point out to the court that as an inducement for the plea, we have discussed with the state of Florida that had pending charges that if the plea is consummated, that the court has, that St. Johns County of Florida would dismiss any and all remaining charges, and then what they did is they did that pre-sentence report where I supposedly drove a U-Haul truck into this woman's house and I supposedly poisoned her food, and yet there's not one police report or any supporting documents to support these claims. These claims turned up in a pre-sentence report, which was done in November of, late October, November of 2001. And then when I challenged the pre-sentence report, I told my lawyer I'd sent a letter to the court, and they didn't do nothing about it. And basically, they used it to enhance me based on the sentencing guidelines, and they enhanced my point level. And then that's how I ended up getting 5 years in jail plus the 1 year on the other charge.
Technically, I think the jail is only for sentences up to a year long. So are you actually in prison somewhere?
Yes, I was imprisoned in the low security Correctional Institute in Butner, North Carolina. I was also in a federal medical center temporarily part-time in North Carolina in Butner, which is in the Raleigh area. And this charge in Florida was a misdemeanor. And when the feds got it in the federal court system, it became a felony because the same charge, which is a misdemeanor in Florida, is a felony in the federal court. And they gave me the maximum time on a felony charge when the original charge was just a misdemeanor.
Did you ever have any actual trial? Were you ever tried for any of these offenses?
Well, I was stupid enough to sign a plea agreement. And then they brought all this up in a pre-sentence report and other documents which were submitted prior to the sentencing that the feds came up with. And in their pre-sentence report, that's where all these allegations came up, that this woman supposedly told this to the Secret Service. I'm looking for the pre-sentence report right here. I have the paragraph. This woman, Dawn, was the victim of multiple threats from the defendant. The victim states that she met the defendant when they were in junior high school. Me and her never went to the same school. This woman, I don't want to say her name over, I don't know if I should say her name over here, but then it says she reported to the Secret Service that the defendant reportedly, there's that word reportedly again, poisoned her food, tried to stab her with a hypodermic needle, drove a U-Haul truck into her house, and also threatened her by putting a gun to her head. And then this woman here reports that the last time she saw the defendant was in January 1998 when the defendant was observed cutting a screen to get into her home. This woman fired a gun at the defendant, but instead of hitting him, she was accidentally struck by the bullet.
But this is all made up. I mean, your position is this is all completely fabricated.
Yes, and if this woman fired a gun at me, but somehow she shot herself, is what they're alleging.
Stand by. We'll be right back. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on the Dynamic Duo.